Hello, hello. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. I'm going to give it just a few more minutes to let people join, but I'm recording right now, so I will, if people join a little bit later, I'll obviously ask them if that's okay. So I'm Patricia Lynch, and if you've joined this call, it's because you've seen some of my posts about what's been happening in my week. Today is the 24th of April 2022, and the week previous to this date held a massive amount of changes and realizations and shifts, really big shifts in what I believe, what I value, and what is important to me. So a little bit of context. I had decided perhaps just over a month or so ago that I would like to leave my full-time job. It's a fantastic job, a great job, a job that someone who really wants to be there would enjoy. And the reason I did that was what I really was looking for was a little bit of security to enable me to grow this business that I want to create and be able to impact the world a little more deeply than I have been in the 35 or odd years that I've been contributing as an adult in a working environment. And so I had made some changes prior to that, and creating financial stability so that I could pursue something that was so important to me and one that my heart desires meant that I took this full-time job, totally expecting it would fill all my needs and I'd be able to do both. Create some stability while I'm building a business and have the freedom to pursue and carry out and be able to support the business in a way that I know it deserved. And then that didn't quite work out. So then I decided I need to just jump in. For me, freedom to make the choices and to be able to say to someone, I'm not going to be able to be what you need me to be this week, and I'll let you know in 2 weeks' time where I'm at. And you can't do that with a full-time job. It's not in the contract. It doesn't sit well with people if you need to ask for flexibility on the spot. So I decided to shift my work mode and will pursue something outside of my own business with a more flexible opportunity. And that means being able to say yes and no to jobs as they occur and as I need them. So alongside that decision, I also thought, how lovely would it be to actually pursue something new with no encumbrances, no debts, no home mortgage, no personal loans, no credit card repayments, just a clean slate. It was so enticing. The idea of taking a breath and realizing that there were no financial strings between me and someone or something else, nothing to bind us, nothing to take my energy and my time into that when I wanted to give it to something else. And so I then decided, I wonder if it would serve me to sell my home. I think that's a great option. I could sell my home, I could use whatever profit there was and pay down and pay off all these debts. And then I could actually have the freedom to just pursue what it is I need to do without the stress of having to work in order to pay just these debts. And so the week commenced and I got repairs done on the house, which were desperately needed because I have a dog who's incredibly anxious and has tendencies to destroy wood, plaster, gyprock. and in the most unpredictable ways. She hasn't done for a good while, so I grant her that. So in the last almost 4 years, there hasn't been much significant damage to our home. But prior to that, this dog of mine, whom I love most dearly, would find a storm, change in the wind, thunder, the army detonating things, someone using a nail gun, a car backfiring, any number of things. Energetic changes in the atmospheres, as well as loud noises, were the things that really drove her towards this anxious behavior. And how that manifested for her was wanting to get away from it. And so if she was in a room, that might manifest as eating a window reveal. I must add, my window reveal, that is like 2.5 meters by another 2.5 meters of wood, solid wood, and plasterboard around it. And so she's done a phenomenal job of creating holes and divots and absolute chunks of missing structure in those behavioral attempts to quell or to move through this anxious feeling that she's getting. And it's taken a lot of energy, a lot of love, and a lot of patience to be able to bring her to a place where she now believes she is secure, she is loved, and she has a home within which she can be safe. And my idea of selling the home, it occurred to me, would uproot her from all of that. And that was one thing. The other thing is, when I got this dog, when our family, actually, did we adopt her or did she adopt us? It's hard to tell sometimes. I think she adopted us. When she came to our home, I had made a vow to her, knowing a little bit about her history, the fact that she was a 2.5-year-old staffy who had been rehomed a number of times, who had an unknown history, perhaps as a breeding dog, still unknown, who was subjected to some trauma that was completely unknown. For this dog to then know that the home that she was now going to be living in would be her very last home, the home that she would never have to worry was going to be ripped away from her. I made a vow to her, perhaps not using the word vow, but I did make a promise to her that while ever she was with me, this would be her home, and she would be loved, and she would be secure, and there would be nothing that she could do that would change that. And I meant it. And I had said that after I'd evidence of her potential of destruction. And her anxieties became more and more prevalent and more known to us. And we incorporated lots of training and lots of energy and time, mostly me, because I was the adult pack leader in the family, but my children were also very active in supporting her where they could, to either overcome or learn different behaviours. And I think on the whole, we were quite successful, as successful as this dog's journey would allow. Speaking of the dog, as you can hear, I'm sure you can hear, this is her drinking from her water bowl. And so I meant that vow, that promise that I'd made her. I meant it fully from my heart, entirely true, and I wasn't going to retract it. What I realized was selling this home may mean that she no longer feels secure and safe and loved as I'd intended she would. And so as the course of the week went on and the home was returning to its former glory, and the handyman was doing the most brilliant job and fixing all these things that needed fixing, my sense of anxiety just kept growing. And I expected to feel quite excited at the prospect of having a home that was returning to its former glory, that I would be really happy to sell and someone would be happy to buy. And I found that the opposite was happening, and I was getting progressively nervous and very anxious and at unease, totally uncomfortable with my idea of selling this home. And it wasn't the selling of the home, it was removing that secure, loving place for my dog. And so I decided selling the home could wait. It could certainly wait until the dog was no longer part of our family. She is almost 10, and of those 10 years, we've had her for nearly 8. So who knew that a dog would have the massive sway and influence over a mere mortal to make such a life-changing decision? And the moment that I made it, of course, that decision not to sell and to remain in the home for as long as she needed, and for all that time to enjoy it together, that sense of nervousness, that sense of anticipation, that sense of dread disappeared. It literally, in the moment that that was a choice I made, it was almost as if it had never occurred. My body did not record anymore from that moment onwards based on that feeling. And it struck me quite significantly. The whole week, in fact, wasn't about selling the home in hindsight. The whole week for me, was about the unlearning and the relearning of intuitive intelligence and the gift of receiving. 2 very important things that occurred to me during the week, and I'll give you some context about them. But sometimes that happens, doesn't it? It's your expectations may not have been met, but that wasn't going to be what that experience or moment was about. And then you realize, oh, okay, it's about this and not that. And when you can accept that gift of relinquishing the expectation and realize what it actually brought you and what it was a gift of, it's an incredible, incredible sense of peace that comes with that, because then you can accept anything that occurs in your environment despite your circumstance. Because I really believe what's for you won't pass you by, good or bad. And I use those terms very loosely, because to me, every experience is neither good nor bad. It's just the experience you're having, and it's what filter you put on and what perspective you take when you look at it. And if it can be as open-hearted and authentic and whole as you can bring yourself to be in that moment, you really will see what those lessons are unfolding. So that theme of intuitive intelligence has been something that has unfolded in the last couple of years for me, from the sense that it is one of those things that was very strong for me as a young person, as a child, and then as a young adult and a teenager. My intuition, I would say, was my keel, the thing that kept me. I didn't always recognize it as intuition. What I recognized was that I had a gut feeling about something, and that I should either do this or do that, or the sense that this was not for me and then this was for me. So it developed into my understanding of intuition much later in my life. But I think we've all had that sense of a true visceral sensation in our gut that tells us something. And for me, that's going to be my coined phrase for it, is intuitive intelligence, because it is intelligent. It has a life and it has a source of its own, and it is there for you to tap into. Unfortunately, it is also subtle and very quiet in the most part. And for me, a very deep meaning and very deep experience through the week was how much my body was reacting at the same time as my intuition was telling me something. And I've probably noticed it at different times, but because of this heightened week that I was having, those experiences and those sensations were equally heightened, like super heightened. So much so that one of them put me in the ED overnight because I was quite convinced that I was having an attack of appendicitis. And that occurred after a conversation with my children about why I was selling the home, and them telling me how angry and unhappy they were at that choice. And a lot of that held some truth because I hadn't consulted and had been transparent with them as much as they deserved through that process. And so it was a conversation that was really hard to hear and hard to have. And as a consequence, my body reacted. I went to sleep that evening and my whole body was churning. And I mean churning. If you can imagine what some butter being turned into cream looks like, or I'm not sure, I think maybe it's milk turning into cream, but that sense of turning and then the consistency changing, that's what it felt like was going on in my body. And within hours I was in the most intense pain, and I could pinpoint exactly where it was. And it was intense, so intense that I was starting to get a little bit worried, and perhaps that I should take myself off to the emergency department, which I did. And it turned out to be, well, nothing they could discern. All the tests came back, unremarkable, which is the term they use, I think. And so I was left with, well, what else could that have been? And it occurred to me that what it was my body saying, this is not on. And it was an incredibly powerful experience, that feeling of my body reacting at the same time as my intuition was quietly whispering. So there were two things happening. I had a very quiet knowing, and often it's just a voice, or it's a heart space feeling that I get. And it's always quiet, and it's powerful, but it's always quiet. But what was accompanying that in this instance, as probably has been the experience many times, but I got it. This week I got it. And that was the intensity of my body's reaction at the same time as that was happening. Incredible, incredible power. And the moment that I was able to recognize that, the moment that I was able to say, I think this is what it is, in an instant, so that in one moment I was speaking to the doctor and he said, just let me know what the pain level's like, and if you need any more pain relief, we can give it to you. And at the very next moment, me saying, oh, I think it's about a 2 now. Literally like that. And so for me, if ever I needed validation about what a powerful instrument our intuitive intelligence is, and what a natural part of our way of being human gets to be supported with, it was that moment. It was the moment where I recognized that as a consequence of my circumstance and the choice that I'd made, my body was really, really struggling to tell me this is not where we need to be, and this is not for you, in the strongest possible way. And so that was a huge occurrence through my week, one that I needed to remember one that I needed to shift and relearn, and one that I remain humbly grateful for. And one that I'm really quite proud of, my achievements over the last 18 months in particular, to be able to say, the way I learn is through experience. Some people can see information all laid out in front of them at different levels, that there might be a change in the scenarios that occur within them. My beautiful daughter is one of those fortunate people. I, on the other hand, am a very experiential learner. And so for me, the value in the lesson is quite often through the experience of having it. And through the experience, I get to say, oh, this is for me, or no, that's definitely not for me. But I need to have the experience. And this was a week of experiences, a huge week of experiences. And at the other end of it, a total gift, an unexpected gift. Perhaps on some level, the experience in the emergency department could have been expected because it was something had to give. But this next experience that I had was totally unexpected. And in the moments just before it was occurring, I could feel a movement towards something. That's what it felt like. I was drawn towards something, and in this instance, that something was a conversation, a very quick conversation on the phone with another person. And the context of that is, for a great deal of my life, I have felt that sense of unworthiness. The blessings and goodness that came in my life, I would often question, either reject or keep wondering, were they really for me? And perhaps not honoring them in the way that they deserve, because I was not openly receiving them. I was always questioning and doubting whether it really was for me. And so that sense of being open to receive has really been a struggle, and one that I was aware that if I overcame, if I accepted, if I just was able to open and be receptive to receiving, it would change my life. I was very good at giving, I thought. I thought giving was what I did. I was a giver, and that was my role. And perhaps receiving was never going to be a big part of that. And over the course of a couple of months, I've been talking to people. I've been sitting in groups where giving and receiving was a big theme. And during one of those, it occurred to me through a sharing that happened in that group environment, that in order to be able to give, you need to have the capacity to receive. You cannot keep both those things in equal balance unless you receive, and that increases your capacity to give. I mean, how cool is that? So cool, so cool. And so my acceptance of being able to receive and being just divine, whole, and loved as I am, and worthy as I am, and therefore open to receiving just as a natural part of who I am, came in the course of a 3-minute conversation with a handyman of all people. So in order to fix the home repairs and have it return to a really good state, there were lots of things that needed to be done. And it would require someone who had the skills and the knowledge to be able to do that. And that definitely was not me. And so I have a really lovely tradesperson who is phenomenal. He has great integrity. He has wonderful skills, and he's got a generous heart. and I don't have the money to pay him for the job that I require him to do. So the conversation entailed me asking him, had he ever taken on a job in a sort of consignment agreement? And his native tongue is German. And that perhaps it was in my asking of the question, but he didn't understand fully what I meant by that. And so I said, well, you do the job and I pay you after the home sells. He said, what time would you like me there in the morning? That was it. I had a need. I felt that I had the capacity to ask, and that if it was for me, I could receive it. And so I did. And so that dear man turned up the next morning and commenced working on my home, fully expecting that at the end of the sale, an exchange of equal value would be made. And in the 24 hours between accepting that agreement and the job, and me waking up and having this revelation that I can't sell this home, I then had to have a conversation with him about what had just changed. And he was still okay with it. And so we have come to an agreement where we're both happy, and his cost and fees will be honoured, and our relationship and friendship remains intact, which is one of the most wonderful things about it. So there are those two really big lessons that had occurred. The idea of using intuitive intelligence to be able to discern, is this for me? And will I continue? And for some people, just that quiet knowing is enough. For me, I truly discovered that I need to hear it and listen for any body cues, any physical reactions with or without it, because I am still learning. It is something that was always there that I remained disconnected from for most of my adult life. And so now that I'm reconnecting back into it, I'm finding that I've got to relearn some of those pathways. I've got to remember some of those things that used to be quite natural to me. And the other just most blessed part of that whole week was the idea of realizing that giving and receiving are equal sides of the same coin, and to remain in balance within this universe, within the human experience, we must have the capacity to receive in order to have a greater capacity to give. And so, you know, the idea of shifting layers of learning and shared stories, and of perceptions that were veiled in trauma and pain, and they may have been stories in some part, but they were also experiences that left a mark against my soul, against my body, and against my mind and my beliefs. And so having those levels at the current place that I find myself dissipate, and some of them shed completely, is incredibly exciting. It's a freedom to be able to move in the world just as you are, divine, whole and loved, worthy of receiving and worthy of giving, as you always were. But the remembering of that is the gift where you can start unlearning and reframing and creating different stories about it. So an incredibly moving, poignant and painful week was had, and one that I will forever be grateful for, because it brought to mind and to my body and my heart the very two top values that are what I will base all my choices and all my interactions and all my communication on. And that is freedom and inner peace. And so if what it is not going to bring me freedom or a sense of inner peace, then it requires a little bit more discernment. And, you know, as part of an experience with another group, I had thought I'd come up with my five top values and principles. And I was very happy with what they were and how I'd, you know, thought that they would be able to be part of who I am. And then I discovered that freedom and inner peace through that experience of a week were two of my top values. I'm sorry for the noise that you're going to be able to hear in this recording. My family live in my home as well. It's our home, and so sometimes that occurs. And that was one of those moments. So there you go. You know, the idea of having something happen and having no expectations attached to it can be a difficult thing. You know, we as humans quite often like to know what the outcome of anything is. And to have the week that I had and have a set of expectations, none of which were met, not in the way I had thought they would. But in fact, what did occur, the outcome of each of those events over that course of a week, was, as always, just what I needed. So, intuitive intelligence. If it's something that you're not sure about, if it's something that you think you have some experience of and you wanted to see what it would mean to really dive in and incorporate it into your life in such a way that it informed the way you walked in the world, who you were, and the choices and decisions that you make, get in touch with me. It's what I do. And I do that by living the work myself and by being my own test case and by being able to share that with other people, because where it is of value to someone, they will recognize it, and I will always be there to support and guide. But your biggest guide and biggest support is you. Always is, always will be. So I thank you so much. I thank you so much for being with me over the course of those minutes that we've shared, and for listening. And if you want to drop in some comments and share some stories, please send me a message, DM me. If you've got my number, call me. Always up for a chat. And let's share and learn together, because I truly believe that's what makes this human experience so much more profound and wholehearted, is when we can recognize that we are not here alone and that our lives have value when we give it in service to other people. So I'm Patricia. Thank you for joining me. And I look forward to connecting with you on another occasion. Until then, stay blessed and stay magically magnificent. Cheers.